Hello everyone, welcome to Vision Innovative. Today we are going to discuss about the history of India. India's social, economic and cultural configurations are the product of a long process of regional expansion. Indian history begins with the birth of the Indus Valley civilization and the coming of the Aryans. These two phases are usually described as the pre-Vedic and Vedic ages. Hinduism arose in the Vedic. If you are not subscribed my channel, please subscribe and press the bell icon for latest video notification. History of India. The Indian subcontinent, the great landmass of South Asia, is the home of one of the world's oldest and most influential civilizations. In this article, the subcontinent, which for historical purposes is usually called simply India, is understood to comprise the area of not only the present-day Republic of India but also the republics of Pakistan. The eastern part of Pakistan until its independence in 1971. For the histories of these latter two countries since their creation, see Pakistan and Bangladesh. Since early times, the Indian subcontinent appears to have provided an attractive habitat for human occupation. Towards the south, it is effectively sheltered by wide expanses of ocean, which tended to isolate it culturally in ancient times, while to the north it is protected by the massive ranges of Himalayas, which also sheltered it from the Arctic wind and their currents of Central Asia. Only in the northwest and northeast is there easier access by land, and it was through those two sectors that most of the early contacts with the outside world took place. Within the framework of hills and mountains represented by the Indo-Iranian borderlands on the west, the Indo-Myanmar borderlands in the east, and the Himalayas to the north. The subcontinent may in broadest terms to be divided into two major divisions. In the north, the basin of the Indus and Ganges River, the Indo-Gangetic Plain, and to the south the block of Archean rocks that forms the Deccan Plateau region. The expansive alluvial plain of the river basins provided the focus the rise of two great phases of city life. The civilization of the Indus Valley known as the Indus civilization. During the 3rd millennium BCE and during the 1st millennium BCE, that of the Ganges to the south of this zone and separating it from the peninsula proper is a belt of hills and forest, running generally from west to east and to this day largely inhabited by tribal people. This belt has played mainly a negative role throughout Indian history in that it remained relatively thinly populated and did not form the focal point of any of the principal regional cultural developments of South Asia. However, it is traversed by various routes linking the more attractive areas north and south of it. The Narmada River flows through this belt towards the west, mostly along the Vindhya range, which has long been regarded as the symbolic boundary between northern and southern. The northern parts of India represent a series of contrasting regions, each with its own distinctive cultural history and its own distinctive population. In the northwest, the valley of the Baluchistan uplands are a low rainfall area, producing mainly wheat and barley and having a low density of population. Its residents, mainly tribal people, are in many respects closely akin to their Iranian neighbors. The adjacent Indus plains are also an area of extremely low rainfall, but the annual flooding of the river in ancient times and the exploitation of its waters by canal irrigation in the modern period have enhanced agricultural productivity, and the population is correspondingly denser than that of Balochistan. The Indus Valley may be divided into three parts. In the north are the plains of the five tributary rivers of the Punjab. In the center, the consolidated waters of the Indus and its tributaries flow through the alluvial plains of Sindh. And in the south, the waters pass naturally into the Indus Delta. East of the latter is the Great Indian or Thar Desert, which is in turn bounded on the east by a hill system known as the Aravalli Range. The northernmost extent of the Deccan Plateau region. Beyond them is the hilly region of Rajasthan and the Malwa Plateau. To the south is the Kathiawar Peninsula, forming both geographically and culturally an extension of Rajasthan. All of these regions have a relatively denser population than the preceding group, but for topographically regions, they have tended to be somewhat isolated, at least during historical times. East of the Punjab and Rajasthan, northern India develops into a series of belts running broadly west to east and following the line of foothills of the Himalayan ranges in the north. The southern belt consists of a hilly forested area broken by the numerous escarpments in close association with the Vindhya range, including the Bhandara, Reva and Kaimur plate. Between the hills of the central India and the Himalayas lies the Ganges River valley proper, constituting an area of high density population, moderate rainfall and high agricultural productivity. Archaeology suggests that from the beginning of the first millennium BCE, rice cultivation has played a large part in supporting this population. The Ganges Valley divided into three major parts. To the west is the Ganges-Yamuna Doab, and to and east of the confluence lies the Middle Ganges Valley, in which population tends to increase and cultivation of ice predominates. And to the southeast lies the extensive delta of the combined Ganges and Brahmaputra. The Brahmaputra flows from the northeast, rising from the Tibetan Himalayas and emerging from the mountains into the Assam Valley, being bounded on the east by the Patkai Boom Range and the Naga Hills, and on the south by the Mikir Khasi, Jaintia and Garo Hills. There is plenty of evidence that influence reached India from the northeast in ancient times, even if they are less prominent than those that arrived from the north. Along the Deccan Plateau, there is a gradual eastward declivity which dispenses its major river systems, the Mahanadi, Godavari, Krishna and Kaveri, into the Bay of Bengal, rising some 3,000 feet or more along the western edge of the Deccan. The escarpment known as the Western Ghats traps the moisture of winds from the Arabian Sea, most notably during the southwest monsoon, creating a tropical monsoon climate along the narrow western littoral and depriving the Deccan of significant precipitation. The absence of snowpack in the South Indian uplands makes the region dependent entirely on rainfall for its stream flow. The arrival of the southwest monsoon in June is thus a pivotal annual event in peninsular culture. India from the Paleolithic period to the decline of the Indus civilization. The earliest periods of Indian history are known only through reconstructions from archaeological evidence. Since the late 20th century, much new data has emerged, allowing a far fuller reconstruction than was formerly possible. This section will discuss 5 major periods. The early prehistoric period before the 8th millennium BCE, the period of prehistoric agriculturalist and pastoralist. Third one, the early Indus or early Happen period, witnessing the emergence of the first cities in the Indus River system. The Indus or Harappan civilization 2600 to 2000 BCE, or perhaps ending as late 1750 BCE. 5. The most urban period which follows the Indus civilization and precedes the rise of cities in northern India during the second quarter of the first millennium BCE. The materials available for a reconstruction of the history of India prior to the 3rd century BCE are almost entirely the products of archaeological research. Traditional and textual sources, transmitted orally for many centuries, are available from the closing centuries of the 2nd millennium BCE. But their use depends largely on the extent to which any passage can be dated or associated with archaeological evidence. For the rise of civilization in the Indus Valley and for contemporary events in the other parts of the subcontinent, the evidence of archaeology is still the principal source of information. Even when it becomes possible to read the short inscriptions of the Harappan seals, it is unlikely that they will provide much information to supplement other sources. In those circumstances, it is necessary to approach the early history of India largely through the eyes of the archaeologist, and it will be wise to retain a balance between an object assessment of archaeological data and its synthetic interpretation. The early prehistoric period. In the mid-19th century, archaeologists in southern India identified hand axes comparably to those of Stone Age Europe for nearly a century. Thereafter, evaluation of a burgeoning body of evidence consisted in the attempt to the correlation Indian chronologies with the well-documented European and Mediterranean chronologies. As the vast majority of early finds were from surface sites, they long remained without precise dates or cultural context. More recently, however, the excavation of numerous cave and dune sites has yielded artifacts in association with organic materials that can be dated using the carbon-14 method and the technique of thermoluminescent and paleomagnetic The analysis now permit dating of pottery fragments and other inorganic materials. Research beginning in the late 20th century has focused on the unique environment of the subcontinent as the context for a cultural evolution, analogous to but not uniform with that of other regions. Increasing understanding of plate tectonic and site-one development has greatly advanced this endeavor. Most outlines of Indian prehistory have employed nomenclature once thought to reflect a worldwide sequence of human cultural evolution. The European concept of the Old Stone Age or Paleolithic period remains useful with regard to South Asia in identifying levels of technology. Apart from an universal timeline, similarly what has been called the Indian Mesolithic period corresponds in general typological terms to that of Europe. For the subsequent periods, the designations Neolithic period and Chalcolithic age also are applied, but increasingly as archaeology has yielded more detailed cultural profiles for those periods. Scholars have come to emphasize the subsistence basis of early societies: hunting and gathering, pastoralism and agriculture. The terms early Harappan and Harappan, remains of a major city of Indus civilization, were discovered in 1921, are used primarily in chronological way but also loosely in cultural sense, relating respectively to periods of cultures that preceded the appearance of city life in the Indus Valley and to the Indus civilization. The Indian Paleolithic, the oldest artifacts yet found on the subcontinent, marking what may be called the beginning of the Indian Lower Paleolithic, come from the western end of the Civilisation Range near Rawalpindi in northern Pakistan. The quarterate, pebble tools and flags date to about 2 million years ago according to paleomagnetic analysis and represent a pre-hand axe industry of a type that appears to have persisted for an extensive period thereafter. The artifacts are associated with extremely rich sedimentary evidence and fossil fauna, but thus far no correlative hominin remains have been found in the same region in the earliest hand axes, have been dated paleomagnetically to about 500,000 years ago. The great Indian desert straddling what is now the southern half of the India-Pakistan border supplied significant archaeological materials in the late 20th century. Hand axes found at Didwana, Rajasthan, similar to those from the Shivalik range, yield slightly younger dates of about 4,000 years ago. Examination of the desert soil strata and other evidence has revealed a correlation between prevailing climates and these successive levels of technology that constitute the Paleolithic. For example, a prolonged humid phase, as attested by reddish-brown soil with a deep profile, appears to have commenced some 140,000 years ago and lasted until about 25,000 years ago, roughly the extent of the Middle Paleolithic period. During that time, the area of the present desert provided a rich enough environment for hunting. The Rohri Hills, located at the Indus River margins of the desert, contain a group of sites associated with sources of chert, a type of stone that is a principal raw material for making tools and weapons. Evidence surrounding these chert bands in an alluvial plain, otherwise largely devoid of stone, suggested their development as a major factory center during the Middle Paleolithic. The transition in this same region to a drier climate during the period from 40,000 to about 50,000 years ago coincides with the onset of the Upper Paleolithic, which lasted until about 15,000 years ago. The basic innovation marking this stage is the production of parallel-sided blades from a prepared core. Also, tools of the Upper Paleolithic exhibit adaptations for working particular materials, such as leather, wood, and bone. The earliest rock paintings yet discovered in the region date to the Upper Paleolithic. Other important Paleolithic sites that have been excavated include those at Hunsgi in Karnataka state, at Sanghao Cave in northwest frontier province, Pakistan, and in the Vindhya range, separating the Ganges basin from the Deccan Plateau. At the latter, local workers readily identified a weathered Upper Paleolithic limestone carving as a representation of a mother goddess. Mesolithic hunters. The progressive diminution in the size of stone artifacts that began in the Middle Paleolithic reached its climax in the small parallel-sided blades and microliths of what has been called the Indian Mesolithic. A great proliferation of Mesolithic cultures is evident throughout India, although they are known almost exclusively from surface collection of tools. Cultures of the period exhibited a wide variety of subsistence patterns, including hunting and gathering, fishing, and, at least for part of the period, some herding and small-scale agriculture. It may be inferred from numerous examples that hunting cultures frequently coexisted and interacted with agricultural and pastoral communities. These relationships must have continually varied from region to region as a result of environmental and other factors. Strikingly, such patterns of interaction persisted in the subcontinent throughout the remainder of the prehistoric period and long into the historic, with vestiges still discernible in some areas in 20th century. Thus chronological, the Mesolithic cultures cover an enormous span. In Sri Lanka, several Mesolithic sites have been dated to as early as about 30,000 years. The oldest yet recorded from the period in South Asia. At the other end of subcontinent, in caves of Hindus Kush in northern Afghanistan, evidence of occupation dating to between 15,000 and 10,000 BCE represents the Epipaleolithic stage, which may be considered to fall within the Mesolithic, and domestication of sheep and goats is thought to have begun in this region and period. Many of the caves and rock shelters of central India contain rock paintings depicting a variety of subjects, including game animals and such human activities as hunting, honey collecting, and dancing. This art appears to have developed from Upper Paleolithic precursors and reveals much about life in the period. Along with the art have come increasingly clear indications that some of the caves were sites of religious activity. The earliest agriculturalists and pastoralists. Neolithic agriculture in the Indus Valley and Balochistan. The Indo-Iranian borderland from the eastern extension of the Iranian plateau and in some way mirror the environment of the Fertile Crescent, the arc of agricultural hand extending from the Tigris-Euphrates river system to the Nile Valley. In the Middle East, across the plateau, lines of communication existed from early antiquity, which would suggest a broad parallelism of development at both the eastern and western extremities. During the late 20th century, knowledge of early settlements on the border of the Indus system and Balochistan was revolutionized by excavation at Mehragarh and elsewhere. The group of sites of Mehragarh provides evidence of some 5 or 6,000 years of occupation comprising two major periods. The first from the 8th through the 6th millennium BCE and the second from the 5th through the 4th and possibly to the 3rd millennium. The earliest evidence occurs in a mound 23 feet deep discovered beneath massive alluvial deposits. Two subphases of period 1 are apparent from the mound artifacts. Phase 1, dating to the 8th-7th millennium BCE, was an academic Neolithic occupation. The main tools were stone blades, including lunettes and triangles, some probably mounted in wooden halves with bitumen mastic. A relatively small number of ground stone axes have been found. Domestication of wheat and barley apparently reached the area sometime during this phase, as did that of sheep and goats, although the preponderance of gazelle bones among the animal remains suggests continued depends on hunting. Houses of mud brick date from the beginning of this phase and continue throughout the occupation. Accompaniment to the simple burial of human remains included shell or stone bead necklaces, baskets, and occasionally young caprices slaughtered for the purpose. Phase 1b, dating to the 7th-6th millennium, is characterized by the emergence of poetry and improvements in agriculture. By the beginning of Phase 1b, cattle, apparently Bos indicus, the Indian hampered variety, had come to predominate over game animals, as well as over sheep and goats. A new type of building, a small regular compartments, of which identify it almost certainly as a granary, first appeared during this phase and become prevalent in period 2, indicating the frequent occurrence of crop surpluses. Burial took a more elaborate from a funerary chamber was dug at one end of a pit, and after humanitation, the chamber was sealed by a mud brick wall. From the later phase of period 1 also come the first small hand modeled female figures of unbound clay. The period 1 evidence at Mehragarh provides a clear picture of an early agricultural settlement exhibiting domestic architecture and a variety of well-established crafts. The use of seashells and of various semi-precious stones, including turquoise and lapis lazuli, indicates the existence of trade networks extending from the coast and perhaps also from Central Asia. Striking changes characterize period 2. It appears that some major tectonic event took place at the beginning of the period, burying the original mound at Mehragarh. Nearly all features of the earlier culture persisted. Through the altered form, there was an increase in the use of poetry. The granary structures proliferated, sometimes on a larger scale. The remains of several massive brick walls and platforms suggest something approaching monumental architecture. Evidence appears of several new curves, including the first example of the use of copper and ivory. The area of the settlement appears to have grown, accommodate an increasing population. While the settlement at Mehragarh merits extensive consideration, it should not be perceived as a unique site. There are indications that other equally early sites may exist in the other parts of Balochistan and elsewhere on the Indo-Iranian borderland. In the northern parts of the Indus system, the earliest known settlements are substantially later than Mehragarh. For example, at Sarai Khola, the earliest occupation dates from the end of the 4th millennium and clearly represents a tradition quite distinct from that of contemporary Sindh and Balochistan. With groundstone axis and plain burnished red-brown pottery. The same is the case at Barjahum in the Vale of Kashmir, where deep pit dwellings and associated with groundstone axis, bone tools and grey burnished pottery. Evidence of the achromic Neolithic stage is reported at Gufraktal, another site in the Kashmir region, which has been dated by radiocarbon to the 3rd millennium and later. Development in the Ganges basin. In the hills to the south of the Ganges valley, a group of sites has been assigned to the Vindhya Neolithic. For at least one of these Koldiva dates as early as the 7th millennium have been reported. The sites contain circular huts made of timber, posts and thatch. Associated implements and vessels include stone blades, ground stone axes, bone tools and crude handmade pottery, often bearing the marks of cords or baskets used in shaping the clay. In one case, a small cattle pen has been excavated. Rice husk occurs, though whether from wild or cultivated varieties remains to be determined. There exists considerable uncertainty about the chronology of these settlements. Very few radiocarbon dates penetrate further than the 2nd millennium. Earliest settlements in peninsular India. The earliest dates recorded for settlements in peninsular India belong to the opening centuries of the 3rd millennium. A pastoral character dominates the evidence. In the northern parts of Karnataka, the nucleus from which stone axe using Posterates appear to have spread to many parts of the southern peninsula has been located. The earliest radiocarbon dates obtained in this area are from ash mounds formed by the burning on the sides of the great masses of cow dung inside cattle pens. This indicates that the first settlers was semi-nomadic and that they had large herds of Brahman cattle. The earliest known settlements, which were located at Kodikal and Utunur, date to about 2900 BCE. Other important sites are Brahmagiri and Tekalkota and Karnataka and Utunur and Nagarjunikonda in Andhra Pradesh. At Tekalkota, 3 gold ornaments were excavated, indicating exploitation of local or deposits, but no other metal objects have been found, suggesting a relative scarcity of metals. These early sites produced distinctive burnished grey pottery, smaller quantities of black on red painted pottery, stone axes, and bone pans, and in some instances evidence of a stone blade. The axes have a generally oval section and triangular form with pointed boots. Among bone remains, those of the cattle are in the majority, while those of sheep or goats are also present. Other settlements have been excavated in recent years in this region, but so far they have produced dates from the second millennium, suggesting that the culture continued with little change for many centuries. Stone axes of a generally similar form have been found widely throughout the southern peninsula and may be taken as indications of the spread of pastoralists throughout the region during the second millennium BC. Earliest settlements in eastern India. Archaeologists have long postulated the existence of Neolithic settlements in the eastern border region of South Asia on the basis of widespread collections of round stone axes and urns, often of distinctive forms comparable to those of Southeast Asia and South China. There is, however, little substantial evidence for the date of these collections or for the culture of the people who made the culture of people. Them excavations at one site, Sarutaru near the city of Gavadi, revealed stone axes and soldered shells in association with cord or basket market pottery. The rise of urbanism in the Indus Valley. From about 5000 BCE, increasing numbers of settlements began to appear throughout the Indo-Iranian borderlands. This, as far as can be judged, were village communities of settled agriculturalists employing common means of subsistence in the cultivation of wheat, barley, and other crops, in the keeping of cattle, sheep, and goats. There was a broadly common level of technology based on the use of stone for some articrafts and copper and bronze for others. Comparison and contrast of the high quality painted pottery of the period suggest distinct group among the communities. At a somewhat later date, probably toward the middle of the 4th millennium BCE, agricultural settlements began to spread more widely in the Indus Valley itself. The earliest of these provide clear links with the cultures along or beyond the western margins of the Indus Valley. In the course of time, a remarkable change took place in the form of the Indus settlements, suggesting that some kind of closer interaction was developing, often over considerable distances, and that a process of convergence was underway. This continued for approximately 500 years and can now be identified as a marking transition towards the full urban society that emerged at Harappa and similar sites about 2600 BCE. For the region, the stage has been named the Early Harappan or Early Indus culture. Extent and chronology of early Harappan culture. It is now clear that sites assignable to the early Harappan period extend over the immense area from the Indus Delta in the southeastward into Saurashtra of the Indus Valley to western Punjab in the northwest. Eastward past Harappa to the Bhavalpur region of Pakistan and in the northeast into the Indian states of Punjab and Haryana. In short, the area of the early Harappan culture was nearly coextensive with that of the mature Indus civilization. Radiocarbon dating of artifacts from a number of excavated sites provides a fairly consistent chronological picture. The early Harappan period began in the mid-4th millennium BCE and continued until the mid-3rd millennium, when the nature Indus civilization displaced it in many regions. In some regions, notably in Punjab, the mature urban style seems never to have been fully established, and in this area the early Harappan style continued with little or no outward sign of mature Harappan contact until about 2000 BC. Principal sites. One of the most significant features of the early Harappan settlements is the evidence for a hierarchy among the sites, culminating in a number of substantial wall towers. The first site to be recognized as belonging to the early Harappan period was Amri in 1929. In 1948, the British archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler discovered a small deposit of pottery stratified below the remains of the mature Indus city at the Harappa. The next site to be excavated with a view to uncovering the early Harappan period was Kot Diji in present-day Sindh province, Pakistan. A stone rubble wall surrounded the settlement, which appears to date to about 3000 BCE. An even earlier example in Rahman Deri near Dera Ismail Khan, which appears to have achieved its wall status during the last centuries of the 4th millennium. There, the roughly rectangular grid-patterned settlement was surrounded by a massive wall of mud brick. Early Harappan Kalibangan in Rajasthan resembled Rahman Deri in form. It later served as the basis for an expanded settlement of the mature Indus civilization. Still further east in the eastern Punjab and in Haryana are many other early Harappan sites. Among them, several have been excavated, notably Banawali and Mithavthal. Another example of a wall settlement of the period is Tharo in southern Sindh. This was probably originally a coastal site, although it is now many miles from the sea. There, the surrounding wall and the extant traces of houses are of local stone, subsistence, and technology. Many of the excavated sites mentioned above have yet to be fully studied and the findings published, and knowledge of the various features of the life and economy of their inhabitants remains somewhat scanty. All the evidence indicates that the subsistence base of early Harappan economy remained much as it had already developed at Mehragarh some 2 millennia earlier. Cattle, sheep, and goats constitute the principal domestic animals, and wheat and barley form the kapala crops. From Kalibangan and several other sites in Bahawalpur and Punjab comes intriguing evidence concerning the use of the plough. At the former site, excavator discovered what appeared to be plowed field surface preserved beneath building from the mature Indus period. The pattern of crisscrossed furrow was virtually identical to that still employed in the region. The wider furrows in one direction being used for taller crops, such as pea, and the narrow perpendicular rows being used for oilseed plants, such as those of the genus Sesamum from Banavali and sides of the desiccated Saraswati River. Come terracotta models of plows supporting the earlier interpretation of the field path. The evidence for the various early Harappan crafts and their products also call for further publication and detail before a firm picture can be obtained. Thus, for only a small number of copper tools have been found and little can yet be confirmed regarding their sources and manufacture. A number of the settlement sites lie far from any sources of stone, and thus the regular appearance of a stone blade industry, producing small plain or serrated blades from prepared stone cores, implies that the raw materials must have been imported, often from considerable distance. The same assumption applies to the largest stones employed as rubber or grinders. But in the absence of detailed research, no firm conclusions are possible. Related evidence does indicate that some contemporary sites, such as Livan and Tarakai Kila in the Banu Basin, were large-scale factories, producing many types of tools from carefully selected stones collected and brought in from neighboring areas. These same sites also appear to have been centers for the manufacture of beads of various semi-precious stones. Culture and religion. It may be concluded on the basis of pottery decoration that major changes were taking place in the intellectual life of the whole region during the early Harappan period. At a number of sites, the pottery bears a variety of incised or painted marks, some superficially resembling script. The significance of these marks is not clear, but most probably they represent honors marks applied at the time of manufacture, although it would be an excavation to regard these marks as actual writing. They suggest that the need for a script was beginning to arise. Among the painted decorations found on the pottery, some appear to carry a distinctly religious symbolism. The clear instance of this is in the widespread occurrence of the buffalo head motif, characterized by elongated horns and in some cases sprouting people branches or other plants forms. These have been interpreted as representing a buffalo deity. A painted bowl from Lebanon displays a pair of such heads, one a buffalo and other a bos indicus. Each adorned with people foliage. Other devices from the painted pottery may also have religious significance, particularly the people leaves that occur as independent motifs. Other examples include fish forms and fish scale, pattern that later appears as a common decoration on the mature Indus pottery. Throughout the region, evidence supports a convergence of form and decoration in anticipation of the more conservative Indus. The remains discussed above, considered collectively, suggest that 4 or 5 millennia of uninterrupted agricultural life in the Indus region set the stage for the final emergence of an indigenous Indus civilization about 2600 BCE. It could also be argued, however, that the substantial early Harappan wall towns constitute cities. Much research, excavation, and comparative analysis are required before this fertile and provocative period can be understood. While the Indus or Harappan civilization may be considered the culmination of a long process indigenous to the Indus Valley, a number of parallels exist between developments on the Indus River and the rise of civilization in Mesopotamia. It is striking to compare the Indus with this better known and more fully documented region, and to see how closely the two coincide with respect to the emergence of cities and of such major concomitants of civilization as writing, standardized weights and measures, and monumental architecture. Yet nearly all the earlier writers have censored the Indianness of the civilization, even when they are largely unable to articulate it. Thus, historian V. Goldenchild wrote that the force of Child's world can be appreciated even without an examination of the Indus Valley script found on seals. The attention paid to the domestic bathrooms, the drains, and the great bath at Mohenjo-daro can all be compared to elements in the later Indian civilization. The bullock carts with a framed canopy called ikas and boats are little changed to this day. The absence of pins and the love of bangles and of elaborated nose ornaments are all peculiarly South Asian. The religion of the Indus also is replete with suggestions of traits known from later India. The significance of the bull, the tiger, and the elephant, the composite animals, the seated yogi god of the seals, the tree spirits, and the objects resembling the Shivalinga of later times, all these are suggestive of enduring forms in later Indians. It is still impossible to do more than guess at the social organization or the political and administrative control implied by this vast area of cultural uniformity. The evidence of widespread trade in many commodities, the apparent uniformity of weights and measures, the common script, and the uniformity almost common currency of the seals, all indicate some measures of political and economic control and point to the great cities Mohenjo-daro and Harappa as their centers. The presence of the great canaries of the citadel mounds in the cities and of the citadels themselves suggest, partly on the analogies of the cities of Mesopotamia, the existence of priest kings, or at least a priestly oligarchy that control the economy and civil government. The intellectual mechanism of this government and the striking degree of control implicit in it are still matters of speculation. Nor can scholars yet speak with any certainty regarding relations between the cities and surrounding villages. Much more research needs to be done on many such topics before the full character of the Indus civilization can be revealed. Chronology. The first serious attempt at establishing a chronology for the Indus civilization relied on cross-dating with Mesopotamia. In this way, Cyril John Gad cites the period of Sargon of the Akkad and the subsequent Isin Larsa period as the time when trade between ancient India and Mesopotamia was at its height. Calibration of the ever-growing number of radiocarbon dates provides a reasonably consistent series from site to site. The broad picture thus obtained suggests that the mature Indus civilization emerged between 2600 and 2500 BCE and continued in full glory to about 2000 BCE. Thereafter, the evidence is still somewhat nuclear, but the late stage of the mature culture probably continued until about 1700 BCE, by which time it is probably accurate to speak of the post-urban and post-Harappan stage. Extent. All the earlier writers have stressed the remarkable uniformity of the products of the Harappan civilization, and for this reason they provide a definite hallmark for its settlements. The more recent evidence suggests that if the outermost sides are joined by lines, the area enclosed will be a little less than about 5,000 square miles. This cultural uniformity coincided with some sort of political and administrative unity. The size of the resulting empire is truly vast. Within this area, several hundred sites have been identified, the great majority of which are on the plains of the Indus or its tributaries or on the now dry course of the ancient Saraswati River, which flowed south of the Satluj River and then perhaps southward to the Indian Ocean, east of the main course of the Indus itself. Outside the Indus system, a few sites occur on the Makaran coast, the watermost of which is Sattu Kagan Door. Near the present-day frontier with Iran, the sites were probably ports or trading posts, supporting the sea trade with the Persian Gulf, and were established in what otherwise remained a largely separate cultural region, the uplands of Baluchistan. While showing clear evidence of trade and contact with the Indus civilization, appear to have remained outside the direct Harappan rules. To the east of the Indus Delta, other coastal sites are found beyond the marshy salt flats of the Range of Kutch and in the interior of the Kathiawar Peninsula, Saurashtra. This includes the estuarine trading post at Lothal on the Gulf of Khambat, as well as many other sites, some of which are major. West of the Indus River, a number of important sites are situated on the alluvial Kutchi desert region of Balochistan, Pakistan towards Sibi and Quetta. East of the Indus system toward the north, a number of sites occur right at the edge of the Himalayan foothills, where at Alimgarh, north of Delhi, the easternmost Harappan settlement has been discovered and partly excavated. If the area covered by the sites is compared with that of the early Harappan settlements, it will be seen that there is an expansion in several directions along the coast to both the west and the east, and eastward through the Punjab toward the Ganges-Yamuna Delta. Planning and architecture. The Harappan sites range from extensive cities to small villages or outposts. The two largest are Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, each perhaps originally about a mile square in overall dimensions. Each shares a characteristic layout, oriented through north-south with a great fortified citadel mound to the west and a larger lower city to the east. A similar layout is also discernible in the somewhat smaller town of Kalibangan, and several other major settlements appear to have shared this scheme. Other major sites include Dholabira and Sarkotada near the Range of Kutch, Nasura Firoz in Balochistan, Pakistan, Sattughai in northern Afghanistan, Amri Chantudaro, Judijaro Daro in Sindh, and Sadhanwala in Bawalpur. Among the smaller sites, special interest attached to Lothal, where a number of unique and problematic features were discovered in excavation. Of all the sites, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Kalibangan and Lothal have been most extensively excavated, and more can be said of their original layout and planning. Thus, they are considered in the greater detail below. At three of the excavated major sites, the citadel mound is on the north-south axis and about twice as long as it is broad. The lower city is laid out in a grid pattern of streets. Kalibangan, these were of regularly controlled widths with the major streets running through, while the minor lanes were sometimes offset, creating different sizes of blocks. At all three sides, the citadel was protected by a massive defensive wall of brick, which at Kalibangan was strengthened at intervals by square or rectangular bastions. At Kalibangan, traces of somewhat less substantial wall around the lower town have also been discovered. In all three cases, the city was situated near a river, although these courses are now extinct. The most common building material at either site was brick, but the proportions of bone brick to unboned mud brick vary. Mohenjo-daro employs boned bricks, perhaps because timber was more readily available, while mud brick was reserved for filling and mass work. Kalibangan, on the other hand, reserved bone brick for bathroom, well, and drains. Most of the domestic architecture at Kalibangan was in mud brick. Brick was generally bonded in course of alternate headers and structures. The so-called English bond stone was rarely, if ever, employed structurally. Timber was occasionally used as a lacing for brickwork, particularly in large-scale works such as the defences of the granary at Mohenjo-daro. The common bricks were made in an open mold, but for special purposes, Saved brick were also employed. Timber was used for the universal flat roofs, and in some instances the sockets of indicates square-cut beams with spans of as much as 14 feet. The houses were invariably entered from the side lanes, with the walls to the main street presenting a blank brick facade broken only by the drainage shafts. Apart from domestic structures, a wide range of shops and crafts workshops have been encountered, including potters, kilns, dyers' wards, and the shop of metalworkers, cell workers, and bead makers. There is surprisingly little evidence of public place of worship, although at Mohenjo-daro a number of possible temples were unearthed in the lower city, and other buildings of a ritual complex character were reported in the citadel. The size of houses varies inconsiderably. At the one extreme are single-room barracks, with cooking and bathing areas formed within by partition walls, and at the other are large houses around a central courtyard or sometimes with a set of intersecting courtyards, each with its over-adjoining rooms. Nearly all the larger houses had private wells. In many cases, brick stairways led to what must have been upper stories or flat roofs. The bathrooms were usually indicated by the fine quality of the brickworks in the floor and by waste drain. Important sites: Mohenjo-daro. The mounds of Mohenjo-daro lie near the right bank of the Indus in the Laracana district of Sindh province. The excavation revealed that the lowest level of former occupation was covered by deposits of alluvial slate to a depth of about 30 feet, attributable to the annual flooding. The lowest levels are those below the present-day water table and are still largely unexcavated. As noted above, the main features of the layout of Mohenjo-daro are a citadel to the west and a lower city and grid of streets to the east. Enough has been said of the general features of the lower city to make it unnecessary to say more of the considerable areas excavated in that part. The citadel, however, demands further attention. In the citadel, the English archaeologist Sir John Hobart Marshall discovered a massive platform of mud brick and clay approximately 20 feet in depth, above which were 6 main building levels. Under this platform lay the remains of the early period. It is probably, but by no means certain, that the platform was raised as protection against floods. Both it and the great brick defensive wall around the perimeter were built at the beginning of the intermediate. The main building of the citadel all apparently belong to the same period. The most striking of these in the Great Bath, which occupies a central position, is the better preserved northern half of the citadel. It is built of fine brickwork, measures 897 square feet, lower than the surrounding pavement. The floor of the bath consists of two skins of sawed brick set on edge in gypsum mortar, with a layer of bitumen sealer sandwiched between the skins. Water was evidently supplied by a large well in the adjacent room, and an outlet in one corner of the bath led to a high coralable drain disgorging on the west side of the mound. The bath was reached by the flights of steps at either end, originally finished with timber threads set in between. The significance of this extraordinary structure can only be guessed at, but it has generally been thought that it is linked with some sort of ritual bathing. To the north and east of the bath were a group of rooms that evidently were also designed for some special function, probably associated with a group of administrators or priests who controlled not only the city but also the great state that is dominated. To the west of the bath, a complex of brick platforms about 5 feet high and separated from each other by narrow passages, formed a podium of some 150 by 75 feet, which has been identified by Wheeler as the base of a great granary similar to that known at Harappa. Below the granary were brick loading bays. In the southern part of the mound, an oblong assembly hall was discovered, having 4 rows of fine brick bent presumably to take wooden columns. In a room adjacent to the ceiling, a stone sculpture of a seated male figure was discovered, and nearby a number of large worked stone rings, possibly of some architectural significance. It seems certain that this area was invested with some special significance and may well have been a temple or connected with some religious cult. Harappa of India. The vast mounds at Harappa stand on the left bank of the new dry course of the Ravi River in the Punjab. They were excavated between 1920 and 1934 by the Archaeological Survey of India, in 1946 by Wheeler, and in the late 20th century by an American and Pakistan team. When first discovered, the extensive surviving brick ramparts led to the sites being described as a ruined brick castle. The lower city is partly occupied by a modern village, and it has been seriously distributed by erosion and brick robbers. The citadel to the west is roughly a parallelogram on plan, measuring approximately 1300 by 650 feet. Excavation there revealed a great platform of mud about 20 feet in thickness, with a massive brick wall around the perimeter. Below the defense were discovered traces of early Harappan period. The excavations were not extensive enough to reveal the layout of the interior, but about 6 building periods were discovered above the platform. The most interesting remains are discovered immediately north of the citadel, close to the bed of the river. There were a series of circular platforms evidently intended to hold mortars for bonding again. A remarkable series of brick plinths which are inferred to have formed the podium for 2 rows of 6 granary buildings, each 50 by 20 feet and of different design from those at Mohenjo-daro. A series of porcelain furnaces apparently used for metal. 2 rows of single-room barracks, which are generally thought to have been occupied by servants. Two other discoveries at Harappa were made to the south of the citadel. There 2 centimeters were found, R37 belonging to the Harappan period and H dating from the late or even post-Harappan period. These contain different styles of burial and will be discussed below. Kalibangan. Third in importance among excavated Harappan sites is Kalibangan, which stand on the left bank of the dry bed of the Saraswati River in northern Rajasthan. As mentioned above, an early Harappan settlement lies beneath the later remains, and the main Harappan township has a layout strikingly similar to the Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. In the lower town, excavation has revealed as many as 9 building phases. The citadel mound is a parallelogram on a plane of about 430 feet on the east-west axis and 850 feet on the north-south. The whole site has been desperately reduced by the brick robbers, but carefully excavation has revealed the foundation course of the accurately laid rhomboid central section with oblong bastions at each corner and smaller bastions on the north and south walls. The principal access was from the south by a flight of steps. Access from the north was via a narrow postern reached by a stairway, beyond which a further rhomboid section having an inset gateway in the northeast corner near the riverbank. Traces of a brick wall around the lower town were also encountered. The central sector of the citadel contained a series of high brick platforms divided by narrow passages. The upper parts of these platforms had been seriously damaged, and their function is mysterious, but they do not appear to have been foundation for the granary. The northern sector contained normal domestic housing. A cemetery was discovered a short distance to the west of the town. It may be expected that when the excavation of the site is published, it will add greatly to knowledge of the Indus civilization. Lothal. One other excavated site deserves special attention. This is Lothal, a small settlement built on low-lying ground near a tributary of the Sabarmati River on the west side of the Gulf of Khambat. It appears to have served as a port of trading station. Its layout is distinctive. The site is roughly rectangular, measuring about 1180 feet on the long north-south axis and 690 feet on the east-west. It was surrounded by a massive brick wall, which was probably used for flood protection. The southern quadrant takes on the form of a great platform of bricks with earth fillings, rising to a height of about 30 feet. On this were built a series of further smaller platforms with intersecting earth channels, reminiscent of the granary at Mohenjo-daro, with overall dimension of about 159 by 139 feet. Behind this block were other buildings, including a row of 12 bathrooms with connected drains, also strongly reminiscent of those found in the citadel at Mohenjo-daro. The remaining enclosed area was evidently taken up by houses and shops. Among the significant finds were a bed maker's factory and the shop of goldsmiths and coppersmiths. The main street ran from north to south. The most unexpected discovery at Lothal, however, was a great big basin measuring some 718 by 121 feet. This lay east of the settlement alongside the platform on which the granary block stood. At one end of the basin was a small sluice or spillway with a locking device. The excavator was informed that the basin was a dock to which ships could be brought from the nearby stream via an artificial channel that would have been kept clear of silt by the controlling the flow of water from the spillway. This view has not been universally accepted. Another view is that it provided a source of fresh water for drinking or agricultural. A cemetery was found outside the perimeter of the wall, west of the site. Other important sites. A growing number of other sites have been excavated, each important in its own way. On the coast near Las Bela in the Balochistan, materials suggesting as a substantial shell-working industry have been found at Balakot. Not far from Mehragarh at the head of the Kutch Desert region in Balochistan. The small settlement of Nasurja Firja provides valuable evidence of the actual transformation of early Harappan into the major Harappan. Near the reign of Kutch, Sarkotada is a small settlement with an oblong fortification wall of stone. Also in Kutch in Dolavira, which appears to be among the largest Harappan settlements so far identified. A 9-year excavation at the site, completed in 2001, yielded a walled Indus Valley city that dated to the mid-3rd millennium BCE and covered some 3.5 acres. The Archaeological Survey of India team uncovered a sophisticated water management system with a series of giant rivers, the largest 265 by 40 feet wide and 23 feet deep, used to conserve rainwater. Of excavated sites in Punjab, Banawali is an important major settlement surrounded by massive brick defense. One of the most surprising discoveries far outside the central war of the Indus civilization is Sattugai in the Amudarai Valley in North Afghanistan. Here the remains of a small Harappan colony, presumably sited so as to provide control of the lapis lazuli export trading originating in neighboring Badakhshan, has been excavated by a French If you want to see more videos, then please like, share and subscribe my channel. Thank you.